They accused you of being cold, arrogant, manipulative, and you felt it, that sting of injustice. That reflex rising in your chest, the urge to say something, to fix it, to make them see who you really are. But the more you speak, the less they listen, and every word is another thread tying you to a version of yourself you didn't choose. You've been there, in the meeting, at the dinner table, on social media. Someone throws the jab, everyone turns to watch you squirm. And you try to stay calm, but your heart races. You want to prove you're not what they say. You want to clear the air, but what if the very act of defending yourself is what makes you look guilty? What if the power you're chasing isn't found in being understood, but in being unreadable? Because there's a kind of silence that doesn't come from fear. It comes from knowing, from choosing, from standing so still they start shaking instead. You've never been told this truth clearly, but today you will, not to survive the noise, but to become the one they never dare to raise their voice against again. You've been taught since childhood that the right thing to do when someone misunderstands you is to speak, to explain, to clarify, to prove your intent. But let me ask you something. Has that ever really worked? Think of the last time you tried to defend yourself. Maybe it was a partner, a coworker, someone online. You calmly stated your side, you gave your reasons, you opened up, and somehow, you still walked away feeling smaller. Like the more you tried to fix their perception, the more power they had to shape it. Here's the truth no one tells you. The moment you defend yourself, you surrender the upper ground, because to defend is to accept their frame. It says, "You're right to question me." It says, "I need your approval to feel okay." And the second they sense that, they know they have you. People don't respond to logic when they are attacking you. They respond to emotional leverage. And when you defend, you give them exactly that. You give them your center. You step into the courtroom they built for you and stand on trial under their rules. It doesn't matter if you're innocent. It doesn't matter if you're right. In fact, the more right you are, the more desperate you look trying to prove it. And in the eyes of the crowd, desperation never looks like strength. It looks like guilt. Margaret Leeds knew this too late, a rising political star in London, calm, brilliant. Until the press found a quote taken out of context and ran with it. Accusations flew, Twitter roared. And in a desperate attempt to save face, she went live. 10 minutes of carefully worded statements, apologies wrapped in dignity, clarifications, explanations, heartfelt reasoning. By the time she ended the broadcast, the room was quiet, and so was the public. Not because she convinced them, but because she looked like someone begging to be heard, not powerful, not poised, just uncertain. What she didn't know was that in power dynamics, certainty beats correctness every time, and the next day, polls dropped. Donors pulled, and the opposition didn't even have to say a word. She'd done the work for them. You might not be a politician, but if you've ever felt the need to explain yourself in a group, you've felt that same heat. That invisible shift where everyone's eyes wait for your reaction, and the silence just before you speak is louder than your entire defense. Because that's what they're watching, not your truth, your stance. This is where power changes hands. This is the moment most people give it away, and this is where you won't, not anymore, not after what you're about to understand next. Most people think silence is absence, a blank space, a lack of defense, but real silence, the kind that shakes a room, is never empty. It's loaded, it's deliberate, it's the sound of someone choosing not to react, because they don't have to. That kind of silence has weight. It creates discomfort, not for you, but for the ones who expected you to flinch, to explain, to squirm. David Cross understood this perfectly. He was a high-profile attorney in New York, sharp, ruthless, always calm. One day, during a high-stakes trial, the opposing counsel accused him of manipulating witness testimony. The room froze. Reporters leaned forward, judges waited. David looked at his accuser, blinked once, and said nothing, not a smirk, not a twitch. Just silence, and slowly something shifted. The accuser started to elaborate. He repeated his point, his voice raised. His tone cracked. By the time the judge called for a recess, the only person who looked unstable was the one who had spoken first. That's the secret. Silence, when it's owned, becomes presence. It creates a kind of psychological tension, a space people rush to fill. And the one who fills it first usually loses. The reason is simple. Most people talk to be reassured, to release the pressure inside their own head. But when you don't give them that outlet, when you don't flinch, you force them to face the echo of their own voice. And that's when doubt creeps in, not yours, theirs, because in the eyes of others, the person who reacts second always appears more in control. And when you hold silence with calm, with poise, with absolute composure, you become unreadable, and unreadable equals unpredictable, and unpredictable, that's dangerous, not in a loud way, not in a flashy way, but in the way a storm holds still before it strikes, the kind of stillness that makes people lower their tone, watch their step, rethink their jab. So no, silence is not weakness, not when you choose it, not when you stand in it like armor. That's silence. That's not the absence of defense. It's the presence of dominance, and once you've learned to wear it, they'll never see you the same again. When someone calls you arrogant, your instinct is to defend your character, to explain the difference between confidence and ego, to justify your actions. But what if, instead of defending, you inverted? What if you used their accusation as a mirror and let it reflect their own insecurity? They say, you think you're better than everyone, and you answer, no, I just don't think like everyone. Suddenly, they're not the one calling you out, they're the one being exposed. This is called psychological inversion. It's when you take emotional momentum and redirect it without resistance. Not through argument, not through logic, but through still, subtle defiance. Here's the key: you don't react emotionally. You don't sound smug. You don't try to win. You respond with calm, neutral detachment, the kind that makes people second guess their attack. They wanted a reaction, they got a mirror, and now they're not sure if they went too far. They're not sure if they look insecure. They're not even sure they believe what they just said. Because you didn't fight them, you made them fight themselves. Think of it like emotional judo. They push, you don't resist. You let the weight of their accusation carry them to the ground. Someone says, you're manipulative. You respond, only people who can't be influenced say that. They say, you're fake. You say, everyone says that when they stop getting what they want. These aren't comebacks, they're deflections. And they work because they don't accept the frame of attack. They redefine it. They reframe it as emotional weakness, not yours, theirs. Now they are left scrambling to explain themselves, and you've said almost nothing. That's what power looks like. Not when you dominate the conversation, but when you shift it, without raising your voice, without breaking eye contact, without even leaning forward. You don't have to be cruel, just composed, just sharp enough to make them hesitate next time. Because once you master inversion, you never need to defend yourself again. You just let them carry their accusation all the way to their own collapse. Chloe Mayers was once the darling of the wellness industry, founder of a mindfulness startup, hundreds of thousands of followers, invited to speak everywhere, until one day a former partner posted a thread titled "The Truth About Chloe." It went viral. Accusations poured in, cold, controlling, fake. People demanded a response. They flooded her comments. They tagged her name. They waited for the denial, for the defense, for the usual statement people give when their image is under fire. But Chloe didn't say a word. No press release, no Instagram story, nothing. And the silence grew louder. At first, people assumed she was guilty, that she couldn't defend herself. But as the days passed, something strange happened. The tone shifted. The thread poster started to post again, longer, angrier, more emotional, more obsessed, and Chloe still silent. That's when people began to see it differently. They didn't see a woman who was hiding. They saw someone who wasn't even touched, and the one making accusations started to look like someone spiraling, someone feeding off drama, someone exposed by their own obsession. By day 5, the same followers who demanded an explanation began defending Chloe. They said, "This feels petty. This person is clearly bitter." Chloe's silence says more than any response ever could. And she never lifted a finger. That's what happens when you let the weight of their words fall without resistance. It's counterintuitive. It feels like losing. It feels like weakness. But in the game of public perception, overreaction looks like guilt. Stillness looks like control. The one who panics loses the frame. You've seen this before, not just with public figures, with friends, colleagues, partners. Someone lashes out. The other says nothing, and slowly you start to wonder if the accuser is the one with something to hide. That's the power of letting the drama die on its own breath. Chloe didn't play defense. She didn't attack back. She just stood still long enough for the storm to burn itself out, and when the dust settled, she was still standing, while her critic had destroyed their own credibility in real time. You may not have an audience watching, but the principle holds. Sometimes the most powerful response is none at all, because silence, held with strength, makes the noise turn inward. And that's where it unravels, not on your timeline, on theirs. Power doesn't belong to the person who yells the loudest. It belongs to the one who decides what everyone else is reacting to. That's what the frame is. The invisible lens through which every conversation is viewed. Control the frame, and you control the fight before it ever begins. You've been pulled into frames your whole life. Questions like, "Why are you so defensive? Why weren't you at the meeting? Why do you always need to be right?" And without realizing it, you stepped in. You answered, you explained, you entered their courtroom, and once you're in their courtroom, they're the judge, not you. The frame is the real weapon, and once you see it, you can take it back. Imagine this, you're in a meeting, a colleague leans back and says with a smirk, "I guess bold ideas are your thing, huh?" It's subtle, it's a jab. And the whole room watches for your reaction. You could defend, explain, justify your strategy. Most people would. But what if instead you leaned back and said, "Let's hear yours," then, and now the frame flips, the spotlight shifts. The one who made the comment is now the one being evaluated. They're under pressure, they're on trial. This is the art of frame control. You don't defend within their question, you question the question, you reframe the game. They say, "Oh, why didn't you show up to the event?" You answer, "Oh, why is that important to you?" They say, "You always want to be the smartest one in the room." You reply, "Is that a bad thing in a room like this?" And now the tension is theirs. Now they're the one who needs to explain, and you never had to raise your voice, never had to plead your case. You stayed still and shifted the whole direction of attention. It's not about being rude. It's about refusing to be dragged into a frame that weakens you. Because once you play by their terms, you've already lost. But when you hold your own frame, your own sense of gravity, others start to orbit around you. And that's the essence of power, not noise, not control, but the quiet authority to shift the narrative without ever looking like you tried. Once you learn to spot the frame, you'll stop reacting to jabs. You'll start seeing invitations. Invitations to pull people into your field, where you're not the one explaining, you're the one being observed, measured, respected, and that changes everything. In personal relationships, the rules change. There's no boardroom, no audience. Just emotions, raw, messy, vulnerable, and that's exactly where you're most likely to give away your power, not because you're weak, but because you care. They say, "You don't love me the way you used to. You don't listen anymore. You're so distant now." And suddenly, you're scrambling, trying to fix it, to prove you still care. You explain, you repeat, you reassure, but the more you say, the more it feels like you're on trial again, and they're holding the gavel. Here's what most people never learn. When someone comes at you emotionally, they're often not looking for clarity. They're looking for control, to set the emotional tempo, and whoever controls the tempo controls the frame. It doesn't mean you dismiss them. It doesn't mean you turn cold. It means you respond without losing yourself. Imagine this, your partner says, "You don't care about me anymore." You pause. You let the words hang in the air, not in silence, but in stillness. Then you answer, "That's not how I see it." No defense, no over-explaining. Just a clear, grounded statement. You didn't argue. You didn't agree. You didn't give them your center. And now they're the one who has to consider their tone, their framing, their emotions. You've taken the storm and handed it back without stepping into it. This is emotional composure. It's not about being unfeeling. It's about not being baited. Because in high-stakes relationships, the real danger isn't the argument. It's what happens when you give up your emotional footing just to make peace. They say, "You never open up anymore." You say, "I'm still here. I just don't speak when I'm not ready." They say, "You've changed." You say, "Maybe." People do. Every one of those responses reclaims the emotional lead, not through domination, but through calm, unshakable self-awareness. Because the most powerful person in the relationship isn't the one who wins every argument. It's the one who can feel the pull and still stay anchored. You don't need to defend your love to prove it exists. You don't need to fight for respect to show your worth. You just need to hold your frame long enough for the truth to reveal itself. Not in your words, but in your energy. There's a level beyond silence, beyond stillness, beyond not responding. It's the space where your absence becomes the loudest thing in the room, not because you're hiding, but because you've made yourself unreachable by design. When someone attacks you, they expect one of two things: a counterattack or a defense. They want a tug of war, they want energy, but when you give them nothing, no reply, no reaction, not even a glance, you remove the oxygen from their fire, and that's when the real collapse begins. You don't block them, you don't mute them. You just let their words sit alone, while you go on living. It's not passive, it's deliberate invisibility. A silence that says, "I see you, but I do not step down to meet you." And it breaks people, because most attacks aren't made to hurt. They're made to provoke, to get attention, to pull you back into the drama they've built. But when you vanish, when you disappear into your own focus, your own mission, they're left talking to themselves, repeating, escalating, trying harder. The more they push, the more they reveal their insecurity, their need for validation, their addiction to your energy. And the world begins to notice, not you, them. They become the only voice in the room, and suddenly that voice sounds bitter. Obsessed, small. You didn't argue, you didn't explain, you just stood above it, and in doing so, you exposed everything they tried to project onto you. Because the hardest thing for an emotionally reactive person to face is their own echo. You gave them the silence, and they filled it with their unraveling. This isn't about being cold. It's about being immune. You don't need to prove you're above the noise. You prove it by never stepping into it. You prove it by disappearing and letting their voice become their undoing. They say reputation is everything, that you must protect it, defend it, polish it. But that belief keeps you on a leash, because the moment you try to protect your reputation, you're already at its mercy. There's a difference between being seen as good and being seen as strong. One invites comfort, the other commands caution. The person with a good reputation tries to be agreeable. They explain, they apologize, they bend when pushed. They want to be understood. But the person with a strong reputation, they don't flinch, they don't clarify. They don't explain who they are, because they've decided their image is not up for negotiation, and that decision alone changes how people speak around them. You know someone like this, the person who walks into a room, and no one throws a jab, not because they're loved, but because they're unreadable. People don't test them casually, because no one wants to misstep in front of a question mark. That's the power of ambiguity. When they can't predict how you'll respond, they tread lightly. You don't need to be feared, but you do need to be unreadable. Because predictability invites provocation, and mystery makes people hesitate. It makes them wonder, what would happen if I pushed too far? Would they destroy me? Would they vanish? Would they do nothing at all, and make me destroy myself? That's not a threat, it's the aura of restraint. The unspoken understanding that you could say more, but choose not to. You don't win by being liked, you win by being felt. Your presence does the work, your posture, your gaze, the way you say less, but own more, and slowly you rise above the battlefield, not untouched, but untouchable. That's the kind of reputation that outlives scandal, that doesn't crumble under gossip, because it was never built on the approval of others. It was built on the refusal to ever need it. The final evolution isn't silence, it's presence. The kind of presence that says, I don't defend myself because I don't need to, and not out of pride, not out of arrogance, but because you've built a reputation that speaks before you do. You've trained your posture to stay calm, your words to land with purpose, your gaze to hold weight without force, and most of all, your absence to echo louder than your presence ever could. Because when you stop explaining, when you stop reacting, when you stop chasing understanding, you move from defense to definition. You stop playing in their courtroom, you build your own. The man who never explains himself isn't hiding, he's defining. He chooses every word like a weapon, not to cut, but to end the need for more. He walks into a room and says nothing, but people adjust themselves. He posts a single sentence, and people read it 3 times. He gets accused and says nothing, and yet others rush in to defend him. That's the final paradox. When you no longer defend yourself, others do it for you, not because you asked, but because your restraint commands it. Because silence isn't the absence of power, it's the mastery of it. And from that stillness, a myth is born, not the myth of perfection, but the myth of unpredictability, of composure under pressure, of mystery that no one dares disturb. The misunderstood man becomes the mythic one, not because he's perfect, but because he never flinched, never cracked, never explained. And that stillness, that refusal to play by their rules, becomes the legend they whisper about long after the noise fades. You are no longer in defense. You are the definition of what restraint looks like, of what presence feels like, of what power truly is. Now, the room shifts when you enter. The words stop when you stare, and the world adjusts to the silence you command.